And then the next one is, he says the origin of it, وَأَصْرُهَا الطَّمَعُ وَالرِّيَاءُ دَوَاءُهُ عِنْدِي لَهَا الدَّوَاءُ وَشَمِّرْ إِنْ أَخَذْتَ فِي دَوَائِ عَاقِدَ الْوِيَةِ ذِي الْأَدْوَاءِ أعني الرياء أحد البوائق إيقاع قربة لغير الخارق بل طربا لنفع أو لحمد من خرقه أو اتقاء الضد. So now he says its root cause is desire, طمع. So we get back to طمع. And doing works of worship to obtain a place in the hearts of others. That's called riya. Riya is when you do an action that's a qurba. It's with the condition that it's a qurba. In other words, something that draws you near to Allah, right? If you do an action, فعل القربة لغير الله. That's the definition of riya. If you do a qurba for other than Allah, you're mura'i. And the Prophet ﷺ called it a shirk al-asghar. It's the lesser polytheism. And in a hadith in Ibn Majah, the Prophet ﷺ said, I don't fear for you worshipping the sun, the stars, and the moon, right? But I fear for you the worship of other than Allah through riya. Riya. And there's another hadith, أَخْوَفُ مَا أَخَافُ عَلَى أُمَّتِي riya. The thing I fear from my ummah most is doing things for other than the sake of Allah. So it's izhar. Now obviously somebody who, like if you're a really good shot, or an archer, or something like that, and you want it, people are there and you're doing it and somebody shows up and now you're really going to show them that you can do it. It's madhmum muru'atan, not shar'an. In other words, we have to differentiate between sharia and muru'ah. In Islam, muru'ah is something that you should preserve, your human dignity. That's something, it's blameworthy to do that. Because it is showing off. But it's not showing off in something that relates to a religious matter. So it's not a shirk with Allah like the other one is. So he says, the source is desire and also riya, right? You want people to think better of you, to gain a place in the hearts of others. And he says, its cure is also my cure for the latter disease. In other words, I have a cure for both of these. And he says, my cure for tama' is my cure for riya also. So he says, washammir. So roll up your sleeves, get to work and set out for this cure of the root of all these diseases. Tama'. Right? And riya. Get to work, because riya is related to tama', you're desiring something from other people, not from Allah. And he says, get to work because I've got this cure, right? And aqidi alwiyati dhil adwa'i is, aqid al-alwiya is the root. Aqidul liwa, the one who's carrying the banner, it's like the one who began the thing. The Arabs say aqidul liwa is the one who begins something, so it's where it began. And so he says, I mean by that showing off in good works, riya. And now, this is really important here. Look at this. The signs of riya are three. Laziness and a lack of actions for Allah's sake when one is alone. So you don't have energy to do things when Allah's alone. Like you don't have energy to read the Quran. But when you're in the masjid and there's other people around, you have all this energy to do it. That's a sign of riya. Enthusiastic energy and much action for the sake of Allah when people are present. So the opposite. When they're not there, you don't have any energy. When you're there, you've got energy. Now, there's something that I think also to be careful about, even though it is a sign of riya. وَعَزَّزْنَا بِثَالِثٍ. There's definitely something to be said for company. And that when you see somebody who's worshipping, it can sometimes stimulate you to worship, which might not be from riya, but it's just as the result of like a esprit de corps, a type of, because other people are doing it, gives you an energy to do it. So that's not necessarily a negative thing, but the danger is that you're doing it not for Allah. All right? And then he says, increasing one's actions when one is praised and decreasing them when one is not praised. So you want to hear people tell you how wonderful you are and how much, like the man praying and that people say, subhanAllah, we always see him pray and it's incredible, he just prays all the time, and then in his prayer he says, what about my fasting too, right? The people that love to hear other people saying those type things, right? Right. Yeah. Well, that's behavioral psychology is all based on that. Rewards and stick and carrot to motivate people. In Sharia, it's not necessarily, I mean, there's definitely something to be said for encouragement. In other words, the Prophet ﷺ, when he saw people do things good, he used to say, ahsanta, you did well, things like that. It's not wrong. And there is a hadith that says, if the mu'min hears somebody praising him, it increases him in iman. In other words, it makes him want to do more with Allah, you see. So it has the opposite effect. And this is why this idea of here is that you're doing it solely for the praise. That's what he's saying is the dangerous thing. In terms of telling people, and also there's a difference in Sharia between madah, right, flattery, and between thana, right. Madah is when you're flattering somebody where it's not true, right. Whereas what's permissible is to tell somebody that they did a good job or something like that. You should acknowledge people. Not prohibited. In fact, it's encouraged to acknowledge people, to acknowledge what they do, things like that. The danger for people is to desire the praise. And that's what the people have to work on in their own hearts. And there is a cure for it. He's going to give it in a second. We're almost there. People... Because I'd really like to get through this. You know, we should pray. Do you want to come back? Or do you want to come back for about half hour after Dhuhr? So we'll pray Dhuhr and then come back.
Takbir.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inshallah, there's not much more through here, and then we'll be caught up so we're on. Because I arranged it so we can get through this during these 12 classes. Inshallah, so I'd like to try to keep up with the Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So he's dealing now with Riya, and we were looking at the signs of it, and then so he says, as for its treatment and purification of the heart concerning it, it is to remove from the heart 4 things: love of praise, fear of blame, desire for worldly benefit from people, fear of harm from people. Right? Now, the way that's accomplished is one having yaqeen, certainty that only Allah can benefit or harm you. And that has to be done first at the level of aqeedah, because that is a premise in our aqeedah. In other words, in the belief system that we're commanded by Allah to believe in, there's no harm and there's no benefit except from Allah. Right? Those are 2 names of Allah, an-nafi' wa dar. And if you really believe that, then you recognize nobody else can benefit you or harm you. It's an illusion. Right? It's just an illusion. And so that will free you from this desire for praise and blame or for something other people have. Because in the end, what you really want is Allah to be pleased with you, not other people. Because it's a waste of time. So if all these other people are praising you, telling you how wonderful you are, and Allah is not pleased with you, it's a disaster. And the disaster manifests itself when you die, which is when you wake up. So the point being, don't be deluded by praise and blame. And then another thing to remember is people all over the world, right? There's like Muhammad Ali. There was a time when Muhammad Ali was, he was the big man on the scene. Everybody was praising him, telling him how wonderful he is. Right? And then he's no longer the guy that can beat people up. So Larry King's not calling him, he's calling somebody else. And it's the nature of dunya. praise and blame is all related to your worldly position, your ability in the world. When you lose it, people stop praising you. And in fact, some of the ulama, they said that one of the best signs of the truth of this is when you have nothing, it's very difficult to have friends. And the minute you start getting things, suddenly you have a lot of friends. And that's partly is the natural inclination of the world. I mean, that's the way people are, right? And so, if you're not deluded by that and recognize, right, that, then you find, and that's why, in fact, the ulama have always said that knowledge, traditionally in the Muslim world, knowledge was something that people sought after, because in fact, in the traditional Muslim world, unlike today, which is wealth-oriented, it used to be it was knowledge that was people wanted to be associated with, not with wealth. I mean, this really is true. In the Muslim world, there were scholars that achieved incredible status in the world simply because of their knowledge. And it's no longer the case now. It's interesting, I was reading Helen Keller's autobiography yesterday. And it's very short, and it's an very powerful work. And it's just, I'd really recommend reading it. It's one of the most powerful things I've ever read. Because she was deaf, dumb, and blind. And it's just her experience of her awakening, the awakening of her consciousness. One of the things she said in there I thought was very beautiful. She said that she became deaf, dumb, and blind from a scarlet fever that she got in childhood. So she wasn't born that way. And it's interesting because she said that even though she was 19 months old when it happened, she said the fact that she could still remember what a tree looked like was enough for her when she felt a tree. Just that she'd seen it one time in her life. She said even though she was only less than 2 years old, and she could still remember that blessing of just having seen a tree, that was enough for her, that she'd seen it. That's an amazing thing, just the ni'mah of the eye, the human eye, is just so awesome. Anyway, she mentioned in there that she said there's no slave in this world that didn't have a king somewhere in his ancestry. And there's no king that didn't have a slave somewhere in his ancestry. Right? So, I mean, it's interesting, people, the ups and downs of the world, right? So everybody probably somewhere along the line, right, has, their great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather or something was the king of the Rus. And now they're nothing. Or somebody who's now the king of the Rus, at one time down the line, one of their ancestors was a servant in somebody's house. Get this and get that. And this is dunya. So when you see the nature of dunya is that nothing is permanent. And I'll tell you, when you read the history of the Arabs, the vicissitudes of Arab rulers is just amazing. And if you read like Al-Mansur, the history of Al-Mansur was a Khalifa. He wasn't a Khalifa actually. He was a minister in Andalusia. And he was a mediocre student in the madrasa, but he was very ambitious. And he ingratiated himself, got into the palace, got this one of the really strong women in the palace to one of the mothers of of a Khalifa to be. He enamored himself of her, and she put him in these positions. And there was one minister who was the most powerful minister in there that everybody feared. And Al-Mansur succeeded in having him in the end imprisoned. And he was one of the wealthiest people in Cordoba, and he ended up a pauper, dying in rags in the prison there. And you can imagine the life, that man's life, right? And so it's just the nature of the dunya is like that. So recognizing no harm and no benefit except from Allah. And then also that likewise if the whole creation wanted to harm you, they couldn't, unless Allah willed it. And then if someone believes that with certainty, riya doesn't occur to him. Because the reason people do riya is to get some worldly benefit. You want a worldly benefit. So in the traditional Muslim world, because religious people were so honored, there was a type of showing off in order for them to get a position amongst people, right? And still, that's still a danger, because the Muslims still do respect religious behavior. So people will do those things. Now, he says, I mean by that showing off in good works, one of the calamities of the heart, whose definition is to do an action of devotion for other than the Creator's sake. Indeed, it was really done seeking some worldly benefit or praise from the creation, or to protect oneself from the opposite, meaning harm. In other words, some people will do it simply to get praise, because they enjoy hearing how wonderful they are and these type of things. So that's why they do it. Then he goes on to give its various types. أعظمه ما كان وصرة إلى ذنب كمبدي ورع ليجعل بيده مال يتيم ثم ما لدنيوي أمتطاه سلما. So he says the worst is that which is done as a way displaying virtue in order to be entrusted with the wealth of an orphan. That's really bad. In other words, you use the deen for to be put into an entrustment in which, a'udhu billah, like